Chapter 2, Miss Blessing of the book Joseph and His Friend, A Story of Pennsylvania. By Bayard Taylor.
Chapter 2, Miss Blessing. To consider the evening party at Warrener's a scene of dissipation, as some of the good old people of the neighborhood undoubtedly did, was about as absurd as to call buttermilk an intoxicating beverage. Anything more simple and innocent could not well be imagined. The very awkwardness which everybody felt, and which no one exactly knew how to overcome, testified of virtuous ignorance. The occasion was no more than sufficed for the barest need of human nature. Young men and women must come together for acquaintance and the possibilities of love, and, fortunately, neither labor nor the severer discipline of their elders can prevent them. Where social recreation thus only exists under discouraging conditions, ease and grace and self-possession cannot be expected. Had there been more form, in fact, there would have been more ease. A conventional disposition of the guests would have reduced the loose elements of the company to some sort of order. The shy country nature would have taken refuge in fixed laws and found a sense of freedom therein. But there were no generally understood rules. The young people were brought together, delighted yet uncomfortable, craving yet shrinking from speech and jest and song, and painfully working their several isolations into a warmer common atmosphere. On this occasion, the presence of a stranger, and that stranger a lady, and that lady a visitor from the city, was an additional restraint. The dread of a critical eye is most keenly felt by those who secretly acknowledge their own lack of social accomplishment. Anna Warrener, to be sure, had been loud in her praises of dear Julia, and the guests were prepared to find all possible beauty and sweetness, but they expected, none the less, to be scrutinized and judged. Bob Warrener met his friends at the gate and conducted them to the parlor, whither the young ladies who had been watching the arrival had retreated. They were disposed along the walls, silent and cool, except Miss Blessing, who occupied a rocking chair in front of the mantelpiece, where her figure was in half shadow, the lamplight only touching some roses in her hair. As the gentlemen were presented, she lifted her face and smiled upon each, graciously offering a slender hand. In manner and attitude, as in dress, she seemed a different being from the plump, ruddy, self-conscious girls on the sofas. Her dark hair fell about her neck in long, shining ringlets. The fairness of her face heightened the brilliancy of her eyes, the lids of which were slightly drooped, as if kindly veiling their beams, and her lips, although thin, were very sweetly and delicately curved. Her dress of some white, foamy texture hung about her like a trailing cloud, and the cluster of rosebuds on her bosom lay as if tossed there. The young men, spruce as they had imagined themselves to be, suddenly felt that their clothes were coarse and ill-fitting, and that the girls of the neighborhood, in their neat gingham and muslin dresses, were not quite so airy and charming as on former occasions. Miss Blessing, descending to them out of an unknown higher sphere, made their deficiencies unwelcomely evident. She attracted and fascinated them, yet was none the less a disturbing influence. They made haste to find seats, after which a constrained silence followed. There could be no doubt of Miss Blessing's amiable nature. She looked about with a pleasant expression, half smiled, but deprecatingly, as if to say, "Pray don't be offended," at the awkward silence, and then said in a clear, carefully modulated voice, "It is beautiful to arrive at twilight, but how charming it must be to ride home in the moonlight, so different from our lamps." The guests looked at each other, but as she had seemed to address no one in particular, so each hesitated, and there was no immediate reply. "But is it not awful, tell me, Elizabeth, when you get into the shadows of the forests?" We are so apt to associate all sorts of unknown dangers with forests, you know," she continued. The young lady thus singled out made haste to answer, "Oh no, I rather like it when I have company." Elwood Withers laughed. "To be sure," he exclaimed, "the shade is full of opportunities." Then there were little shrieks and some giggling and blushing. Miss Blessing shook her fan warningly at the speaker. "How wicked in you. I hope you will have to ride home alone tonight after that speech. But you are all courageous compared with the restless. We are really so restricted in the city that it's a wonder we have any independence at all. In many ways, we are like children." "Oh, Julia, dear," protested Anna Warriner, "and such advantages as you have. I shall never forget the day Mrs. Rockaway called, her husband's cashier of the commercial bank." This was said in a parenthesis to the other guests. "And brought you all the news, direct from headquarters, as she said." "Yes," Miss Blessing answered slowly, casting down her eyes. "There must be two sides to everything, of course, but how much we miss until we know the country. Really, I quite envy you." Joseph had found himself, almost before he knew it, in a corner, beside Lucy Henderson. He felt soothed and happy, for of all the girls present, he liked Lucy best. In the few meetings of the young people which he had attended, he had been drawn towards her by an instinct founded perhaps on his shyness and the consciousness of it. For she alone had the power, by a few kindly, simple words, to set him at ease with himself. The straightforward glance of her large brown eyes seemed to reach the self below the troubled surface. However much his ears might have tingled afterwards, as he recalled how frankly and freely he had talked with her, he could only remember the expression of an interest equally frank upon her face. She never dropped one of those amused side glances, or uttered one of those pert, satirical remarks, the recollection of which in other girls stung him to the quick. Their conversation was interrupted, for when Miss Blessing spoke, the others became silent. What Elwood Withers had said of the phenomena of love, however, lingered in Joseph's mind, and he began involuntarily to examine the nature of his feeling for Lucy Henderson. Was she not often in his thoughts? He had never before asked himself the question, but now he suddenly became conscious that the hope of meeting her, rather than any curiosity concerning Miss Blessing, had drawn him to Warriner's. Would he rather touch the edge of her dress than kiss anybody else? That question drew his eyes to her lips, and with a soft shock of the heart, he became aware of their freshness and sweetness as never before. To touch the edge of her dress. Elwood had said nothing of the lovelier and bolder desire which brought the blood swiftly to his cheeks. He could not help it that their glances met, a moment only, but an unmeasured time of delight and fear to him. And then Lucy quickly turned away her head. He fancied there was a heightened color on her face, but when she spoke to him a few minutes afterwards, it was gone, and she was as calm and composed as before. In the meantime, there had been other arrivals, and Joseph was presently called upon to give up his place to some ladies from the neighboring town. Many invitations had been issued, and the capacity of the parlor was soon exhausted. Then the sounds of merry chat on the portico invaded the stately constraint of the room, and Miss Blessing, rising gracefully and not too rapidly, laid her hands together and entreated Anna Warriner. "Otona, do let us go outside. I think we are well enough acquainted now to sit on the steps together." She made a gesture, slight but irresistibly inviting, and all arose. While they were cheerfully pressing out through the hall, she seized Anna's arm and drew her back into the dusky nook under the staircase. "Quick, Anna," she whispered. "Who is the roguish one they call Elwood?" "What is he?" "A farmer. Works his father's place on shares." "Ah," exclaimed Miss Blessing, in a peculiar tone, "and the blue-eyed handsome one who came in with him. He looks almost like a boy." "Joseph Asten. Why, he's 22 or 3. He has one of the finest properties in the neighborhood, and money besides, they say. Lives alone with an old dragon of an aunt as housekeeper. Now, Julia dear, there's a chance for you." "Pshaw, you silly Anna," whispered Miss Blessing, playfully pinching her ear. "You know I prefer intellect to wealth." "As for that," Anna began, but her friend was already dancing down the hall towards the front door, her gossamer skirts puffing and floating out until they brushed the walls on either side. She hummed to herself, "O night, O lovely night," from the désert, skimmed over the doorstep, and sank subsiding into an ethereal heap against one of the pillars of the portico. Her eyelids were now fully opened, and the pupils, the color of which could not be distinguished in the moonlight, seemed wonderfully clear and brilliant. "Now, Mr. Elwood, excuse me, I mean Mr. Withers," she began. "You must repeat your joke for my benefit. I missed it, and I feel so foolish when I can't laugh with the rest." Anna Warriner, standing in the door, opened her eyes very wide at what seemed to her to be the commencement of a flirtation. But before Elwood Withers could repeat his rather stupid fun, she was summoned to the kitchen by her mother to superintend the preparation of the refreshments. Miss Blessing made her hay while the moon shone. She so entered into the growing spirit of the scene and accommodated herself to the speech and ways of the guests, that in half an hour it seemed as if they had always known her. She laughed with their merriment and flattered their sentiment with a tender ballad or two, given in a veiled but not unpleasant voice, and constantly appealed to their good nature by the phrase, "Pray, don't mind me at all. I'm like a child let out of school." She tapped Elizabeth Fogg on the shoulder, stealthily tickled Jane McNaughton's neck with a grass blade, and took the roses from her hair to stick into the buttonholes of the young men. "Just see Julia," whispered Anna Warriner to her half-dozen intimates. "Didn't I tell you she was the life of society?" Joseph had quite lost his uncomfortable sense of being watched and criticized. He enjoyed the unrestraint of the hour as much as the rest. He was rather relieved to notice that Elwood Withers seemed uneasy, and almost willing to escape from the lively circle around Miss Blessing. By and by the company broke into smaller groups, and Joseph again found himself near the pale pink dress which he knew. What was it that separated him from her? What had slipped between them during the evening? Nothing, apparently, for Lucy Henderson, perceiving him, quietly moved nearer. He advanced a step, and they were side by side. "Do you enjoy these meetings, Joseph?" she asked. "I think I should enjoy everything," he answered. "If I were a little older or more accustomed to society. Is not that what you meant? It is only another kind of schooling, which we must all have. You and I are in the lowest class as we once were. Do you remember?" "I don't know why," said he, "but I must be a poor scholar. See Elwood, for instance." "Elwood," Lucy slowly repeated. "He is another kind of nature altogether." There was a moment's silence. Joseph was about to speak when something wonderfully soft touched his cheek, and a delicate violet-like odor swept upon his senses. A low musical laugh sounded at his very ear. "There, did I frighten you?" said Miss Blessing. She had stolen behind him and, standing on tiptoe, reached a light arm over his shoulder to fasten her last rosebud in the upper buttonhole of his coat. "I quite overlooked you, Mr. Asten," she continued. "Please turn a little towards me. Now, Has it not a charming effect? I do like to see some kind of ornament about the gentleman, Lucy, and since they can't wear anything in their hair. But tell me, wouldn't a wreath of flowers look well on Mr. Asten's head? I can't very well imagine such a thing, said Lucy. No? Well, perhaps I am foolish, but when one has escaped from the tiresome conventionalities of city life and comes back to nature and delightful natural society, one feels so free to talk and think. Ah, you don't know what a luxury it is just to be one's true self. Joseph's eyes lighted up, and he turned towards Miss Blessing, as if eager that she should continue to speak. Lucy, said Elwood Withers, approaching, you came with the Macnaughtons, didn't you? Yes. Are they going? They are talking of it now, but the hour is early, and if you don't mind riding on a pillion, you know my horse is gentle and strong. That's right, Mr. Withers, interrupted Miss Blessing. I depend upon you to keep Lucy with us. The night is at its loveliest, and we are all just fairly enjoying each other's society. As I was saying, Mr. Asten, you cannot conceive what a new world this is to me. Oh, I begin to breathe, at last. Therewith she drew a long, soft inspiration and gently exhaled it again, ending with a little flutter of the breath, which made it seem like a sigh. A light laugh followed. I know without looking at your face that you are smiling at me, said she. But you have never experienced what it is to be shy and uneasy in company, to feel that you are expected to talk and not know what to say, and when you do say something, to be startled at the sound of your voice, to stand or walk or sit and imagine that everybody's watching you, to be introduced to strangers and be as awkward as if both spoke different languages and were unable to exchange a single thought. Here, in the country, you experience nothing of all this. Indeed, Miss Blessing, Joseph replied. It is just the same to us, to me, as city society is to you. How glad I am, she exclaimed, clasping her hands. It is very selfish in me to say it, but I can't help being sincere towards the sincere. I shall now feel ever so much more freedom in talking with you, Mr. Asten, since we have one experience in common. Don't you think, if we all knew each other's natures truly, we should be a great deal more at ease, and consequently happier? She spoke the last sentence in a low, sweet, penetrating tone, lifted her face to meet his gaze a moment, the eyes large, clear, and appealing in their expression, the lips parted like those of a child, and then, without waiting for his answer, suddenly darted away, crying, Yes, Anna, dear. What is it, Julia? Anna Warriner asked. Oh, didn't you call me? Somebody surely called some Julia, and I'm the only one, am I not? I've just arranged Mr. Asten's rosebuds so prettily, and now all the gentlemen are decorated. I'm afraid they think I take great liberties for a stranger, but then you all make me forget that I am strange. Why is it that everybody is so good to me? She turned her face upon the others with a radiant expression. Then there were earnest protestations from the young men, and a few impulsive hugs from the girls, which latter Miss Blessing returned with kisses. Elwood Withers sat beside Lucy Henderson on the steps of the portico. Why, we owe it to you that we're here tonight, Miss Blessing, he exclaimed. We don't come together half often enough as it is, and what better could we do than meet again, somewhere else, while you are in the country? Oh, how delightful, how kind, she cried. And while the lovely moonlight lasts, shall I really have another evening like this? The proposition was heartily seconded, and the only difficulty was how to choose between the 3 or 4 invitations which were at once proffered. There was nothing better to do than to accept all in turn, and the young people pledged themselves to a 10th. The new element which they had dreaded in advance as a restraint had shown itself to be the reversey. They had never been so free, so cheerfully excited. Miss Blessing's unconscious ease of manner, her grace and sweetness, her quick, bright sympathy with country ways, had so warmed and fused them that they lost the remembrance of their stubborn selves and yielded to the magnetism of the hour. Their manners, moreover, were greatly improved simply by their forgetting that they were expected to have any. Joseph was one of the happiest sharers in this change. He eagerly gave his word to be present at the entertainments to come. His heart beat with delight at the prospect of other such evenings. The suspicion of a tenderer feeling towards Lucy Henderson, the charm of Miss Blessing's winning frankness, took equal possession of his thoughts, and not until he had said good night did he think of his companion on the homeward road. But Elwood Withers had already left, carrying Lucy Henderson on a pillion behind him. "Is it 10 o'clock, do you think?" Joseph asked of one of the young men as they rode out of the gate. The other answered with a chuckle, "10? It's nigher morning than evening." The imp on the crupper struck his claws deep into Joseph's sides. He urged his horse into a gallop, crossed the long rise in the road, and dashed along the valley level, with the cool, dewy night air whistling in his locks. After entering the lane leading upward to his home, he dropped the reins and allowed the panting horse to choose his own gait. A light sparkling through the locust trees pierced him with the sting of an unwelcome external conscience, in which he had no part, yet which he could not escape. Rachel Miller looked wearily up from her knitting as he entered the room. She made a feeble attempt to smile, but the expression of her face suggested imminent tears. "Aunt, why did you wait?" said he, speaking rapidly. "I forgot to look at my watch, and I really thought it was no more than 10. He paused, seeing that her eyes were fixed. She was looking at the tall, old-fashioned clock. The hand pointed to 12:30, and every cluck of the ponderous pendulum said distinctly, "Late, late, late." He lighted a candle in silence, said, "Good night, Aunt," and went up to his room. "Good night, Joseph," she solemnly responded, and a deep, hollow sigh reached his ear before the door was closed.
This is the end of Chapter 2, Miss Blessing, of the book Joseph and His Friend, A Story of Pennsylvania. By Bayard Taylor. Watch this channel on this playlist for the next chapter. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, and click the bell to support this channel and to get a notification for the next installment of this story and for more amazing content. And always, love, peace, and release.